Good morning and welcome to today's episode of Talk of the Town with Farah Shaukat Ali and Dr. Irvin Studin. What do we have today for us?
Approximately 350,000 students on average join the education system every year. And at the end of that time, when it's time to perhaps get into university, there's only around 35,000 student spaces at university level, another 114,000 at sort of college level. But what do you think the government here ought to be doing? How can we address the problem?
Well, I always come with the proviso that I don't jump into domestic affairs, and I give counsel very humbly and parametrically because I'm a visitor and have been invited to give some keynotes. But let me walk back a few steps before I jump to counsel to the wonderful country of Sri Lanka. What happened during the pandemic is that the world of students and children was divided into three buckets. The first bucket was classical or physical school, which you and I enjoyed and which was enjoyed by the majority of students in the world until the pandemic. The second bucket was that of virtual or online schooling, to which we imagined most children pivoted seamlessly once the schools closed. And the third bucket was no school at all and zero school. And these kids who were in the third bucket often never returned to school. And they ended up in the third bucket for a host of reasons, but most importantly in Sri Lanka and in much of South Asia, because they never had access to internet or phone devices or Wi-Fi once things went virtual. And the numbers could be in the villages up to 80 or 90% of the student body, and in the cities maybe 5 or 6% of the student body, but it would grow over time as the school closures endured. And in Sri Lanka you had about 21 months of closures on and off those. That's a very, very long period. So South Asia in general ends up being the worst region of all the world for this third bucket catastrophe. You have in the low hundreds of millions of young people who were ousted from schooling permanently. When the schools reopened recently, they never returned. And so from grade 1 all the way to A levels, they could have been out of school prematurely, and then they're left to fend for themselves, underprepared in a world that in a secular sense is much more cruel post-pandemic. And in Sri Lanka you feel this most acutely with the economic crisis, the energy crisis, the petrol crisis. How is an undereducated or patently uneducated child to do well? And the gap therefore between what that world post-pandemic requires and what the state of preparation is for the child is what I call a misery gap. South Asia is very large, but around the world we now have hundreds of millions, maybe 300, 400 million children who are in this third bucket because of the school closures and because of the inability of governments and societies to realize that they have to be brought back to school and prepared for a more difficult tomorrow. So that's a central challenge of Sri Lanka, as it is in many countries in the region and around the world.
What can we do with these children who ended up in the third bucket?
Well, first of all, I'm here to make sure that governments and education leaders appreciate the catastrophe, because when you close the schools in my own country of Canada, just as in Sri Lanka, it is an abstraction what happens on the ground. And I'm here to report that as soon as you shutter the schools, the day after you have disintegration on the ground. That the childhood collapses, the child leaves school often permanently, never to return at all ages for a host of reasons. But so once you appreciate it, 2 years ago already we should have been finding these young people and bringing them back to school with great rapidity, with great energy. I'm here to report at a very late stage that there's still an opportunity to go school by school, triangulate attendance records back to 2019, 2020, find where these children are, and if possible, bring them back to school, give them a bespoke curriculum, and give them an added 1 year or 2, as some societies have done, in order to adequately prepare them for tomorrow. For the remainder of the student body in Sri Lanka that remains in the school system, but that has been compromised through virtual learning or no learning at all, but is still formally being educated within the system, you have to adduce huge energy. There's huge energy and ambition to that student body, because first of all, they've lost time, they've lost standards. Tomorrow will be more cruel, as we've discussed, and there's very limited time. You only have a limited time period in which to prepare the child, after which the window closes, the child becomes an adult, you're done. Our job as educators is done. The child hopefully will be able to fend for him or herself in the world, but it is our adult duty to prepare the child. If we haven't prepared the child, we've failed that moral duty, but strategically, and this is important for Sri Lanka, the failure is at the national level, because then you compare Sri Lanka and even Canada, which failed on education, or the UK, which failed in education during the pandemic, with countries and societies that didn't have this third bucket catastrophe and that didn't undereducate their children during the pandemic period. They will have successful adult classes. They will compete with our children as adults, and they will win. And we will wonder what happened. And they will think we're Martian for having closed the schools or for having this third bucket disaster at scale at our feet.
Thank you very much, Dr. Irvin Studin.
And that's a wrap of today's episode. It's now time to go back to the studio.